The night around the Crimean Bridge looks ordinary at first glance. The kind of quiet that feels heavy but harmless. A blanket of fog over water, slow-moving vehicles, routine signals flickering across distant screens. Somewhere, along a narrow coastal corridor, a long line of trucks is waiting for clearance. Engines idling softly, drivers checking documents, sipping from thermoses, passing the time in that familiar space between motion and rest. Nothing dramatic is visible, nothing that would make anyone step out of line or question the routine. Yet in modern conflicts, the most important moments rarely begin with noise or motion. They begin with absence, with the sense that nothing is happening, while in reality, many small, quiet things are already moving into place. This is one of those nights. Far above the water and just beyond the horizon, invisible systems are quietly aligning. No dramatic launches, no obvious signals, no sudden alerts. Just mathematics, timing, and careful planning. Layers of technology built to notice fast, loud, obvious threats are waiting for something that does not look like a threat at all. And that difference matters. Because what defines this moment is not power, but subtlety. Not speed, but patience. The kind of patience that lets something unfold slowly while everyone assumes the situation is stable. The fog, the sea, the terrain, and the routines themselves become part of the picture, not obstacles, but features that shape what comes next. Inside command rooms, operators watch clean screens and familiar patterns. No alarms, no warnings that demand attention. Everything looks normal enough to justify staying calm. And calm, in moments like this, is a powerful force. It keeps convoys moving, keeps valves closed, keeps safety procedures relaxed. It keeps people trusting that systems are working as intended. That trust is important because once it is in place, it becomes very hard to question. The human mind is designed to notice sudden change, not gradual alignment. And what is happening now is not sudden at all. It is layered, quiet, and incremental, like the slow turning of a dial rather than the flip of a switch. Somewhere in this layered calm, an unseen threshold is being crossed. Not a border on a map, not a line on a screen, but a boundary of assumptions. A point after which the situation is no longer what it appears to be, even though nothing visible has changed yet. This is the part of the story that is easy to overlook, because there is no single image to point to, no single moment to replay. It is a process rather than an event, a preparation rather than an impact. And by the time the first clear sign appears that something is wrong, the conditions that shaped it will already be behind us. That is why this story does not start with a flash, or a sound, or a headline. It starts with stillness. With vehicles waiting, sensors watching, people trusting their routines, and technology quietly doing what it was designed to do. It starts with a system that believes it is safe because it cannot see danger. And in the next part, we will see what happens when that belief finally meets reality. Subscribe and stay with us, because what unfolds from this calm is not just an event, but a lesson about how modern conflicts truly begin. The calm breaks not with a roar, but with a sequence of small signals that only make sense after the fact. A faint anomaly on a screen, a pattern that looks like interference, a return that does not quite fit into any familiar category. Operators hesitate for a moment because the data does not match the mental models they have been trained to trust. This hesitation is not a mistake. It is a human reaction to ambiguity. And ambiguity is exactly what defines the early phase of what is about to happen. What looks like noise is in fact structure. What looks like clutter is in fact coordination. And what looks like nothing is already something. Along the approaches to Crimea, over the Black Sea and just above the surface, a carefully layered sequence of unmanned systems is moving inward. They are not loud, not fast, and not shaped like the threats air defense networks were designed to defeat. Their profiles are small, their signatures weak, Their behavior slow and steady rather than aggressive. They take advantage of the physical limits of radar, of the way the curvature of the Earth hides low objects, of the way waves and fog distort returns, of the way software tries to simplify complex input into recognizable categories. Instead of presenting themselves as a clear danger, they dissolve into the background, becoming part of the environment rather than a distinct object within it. At the same time, electronic effects are shaping perception in subtle ways. Signals overlap, reflections multiply, weak returns are fused into larger ones, and larger ones are blurred into something that looks imprecise and unreliable. To the systems watching, the picture becomes confusing rather than alarming. Confusion is dangerous because it slows decision-making. It invites consultation, double-checking, and waiting for confirmation. In military systems, confirmation usually comes from multiple independent sources agreeing with each other. Here, that agreement never quite forms, because each sensor is being shown a slightly different version of reality. As this layered picture moves inward, ground-level routines continue uninterrupted. Vehicles remain in place, equipment stays pressurized, safety margins remain theoretical rather than active. No one is acting with urgency because no one sees a reason to do so. This is the invisible success of the first phase. Not the penetration of airspace, not the movement of machines, but the preservation of normal behavior. A system that continues to behave normally under abnormal conditions becomes fragile without realizing it. Then, in a narrow window of time, measured in minutes rather than hours, the situation shifts. Short-range defenses begin to engage what they can now see, or at least what they think they see. Fire is directed into fog, into empty air, into shapes that are partly real and partly illusion. Ammunition is consumed, attention is focused downward and inward, and the defensive posture tightens around the wrong layer of the problem. This is not because the defenders are incompetent, but because they are responding logically to the information available to them. Logic is only as good as the inputs that feed it. Above this activity, still mostly unseen, a second layer moves into position. Manned aircraft, operating at the edges of what physics and terrain allow, align their timing with the unfolding distraction below. This alignment is precise, not in the cinematic sense of perfect choreography, but in the statistical sense of probabilities stacking in one direction. The probability that defenses are focused elsewhere, the probability that sensors are degraded, the probability that human attention is narrowed by urgency. None of these probabilities is certain on its own, but together they create a window. When that window opens, it is brief. Weapons are released not into a static target, but into a system already destabilized by confusion, distraction, and internal stress. The impacts themselves are not remarkable in isolation. Precision munitions do what precision munitions are designed to do. They strike where they are aimed. What makes the result dramatic is not the power of a single weapon, but the context into which it arrives. A context shaped by materials that react violently to heat, by tightly packed equipment, by stored energy in chemical and mechanical form waiting for a trigger. Fire spreads not as a simple burn, but as a chain reaction. Heat meets oxidizer, pressure meets rupture, liquid meets flame. The physical processes are ordinary, but their combination is not. The result is not a single explosion, but a cascade of them, each feeding the next, each amplifying what came before. The scene transforms from a point of impact into a field of reactions, and then into something that no longer resembles a functioning location at all. From a distance, sensors see only a sudden thermal spike, a bloom of heat where there was none before. From closer in, visibility is overwhelmed by smoke, light, and noise. From inside the event, if anyone is able to perceive it at all, there is no coherent narrative, only fragments of sensation. The human brain is not designed to process environments that change this quickly, and so experience collapses into confusion just as systems did minutes earlier. When it ends, or at least when the most active phase subsides, What remains is not just physical damage, but informational damage. A loss of clarity about what exactly happened, in what order and why. That loss of clarity matters because it slows response, shapes public narratives, and influences strategic decisions. In modern conflicts, what people believe happened can be almost as important as what actually happened. This is the essence of the event not as a spectacle, but as a process. A process in which perception is shaped before action, in which attention is guided away from what matters most, and in which the decisive moment is prepared long before it is visible. It is not a story about a single strike or a single weapon, but about how layered systems interact, how humans and machines interpret the world together, and how that interpretation can be gently steered in one direction while reality moves in another. By the time clarity returns, the physical outcome is already fixed. What can still change is the meaning assigned to it, the lessons drawn from it, and the strategies built on those lessons. And that is where the story continues, beyond the immediate event, into the longer consequences that unfold not in minutes, but in weeks, months, and years. In the hours and days that follow, the visible damage becomes easier to describe than the invisible consequences. Satellite images show a darkened patch of ground, scorched surfaces, warped metal, and the absence of what used to be there. Logistics planners see numbers change on spreadsheets. Timetables are revised, routes are adjusted, priorities are reordered. What looks like a single localized incident becomes a distributed problem that touches ports, rail hubs, fuel depots, repair facilities, and command structures far from the original site. A bridge is not just a bridge. It is a node in a network, and when a node is weakened, the entire network feels it. The Crimean Bridge has always been more than concrete and steel. Since its opening, it has functioned as a political symbol, an economic artery, and a military lifeline all at once. It connects Crimea to mainland Russia physically, but it also connects narratives, strategies, and expectations. Any disruption to it, even partial or temporary, reverberates beyond transport. It affects confidence in control, in continuity, in the idea that certain structures are permanent and therefore safe to rely on. When that sense of permanence is shaken, planners are forced to think in terms of contingency rather than certainty. In Moscow, in Sevastopol, in Rostov-on-Don, in logistics centers and administrative offices, conversations shift tone. Not publicly at first, not in speeches or headlines, but in internal language. Words like delay, reroute, conserve, prioritize begin to replace words like expand, accelerate, and secure. This linguistic shift reflects a deeper strategic one. It is the difference between acting from a position of assumed stability and acting from a position of managed risk. On the other side, in Kiev and in Allied capitals, the focus is not only on what was achieved, but on what was learned. Every operation is a data point. Every response reveals something about sensors, decision chains, thresholds, and tolerances. Which systems reacted first? Which reacted late? Which reacted not at all? Which decisions were centralized? Which were local? Which were automatic? And which required human judgment? This information is often more valuable than the immediate tactical effect, because it shapes future choices on both sides. What emerges from this is not a simple story of success or failure, but a complex picture of adaptation. Modern conflicts are not static competitions of strength. They are dynamic competitions of learning. Each side observes, tests, adjusts, and tries again in a continuous cycle. The battlefield is not just physical terrain, but cognitive and organizational space. It is the space of assumptions, doctrines, and expectations. When those are disrupted, even briefly, the impact can be profound. There is also a broader international dimension. Events like these are watched closely far beyond the region in which they occur. Military analysts in Washington, London, Berlin, Paris, and Beijing examine the same footage, the same reports, the same fragments of data, each through their own strategic lens. They ask not only what happened, but what it implies about future conflicts. about the vulnerability of infrastructure, about the effectiveness of layered defenses, about the role of low-cost systems in shaping high-cost outcomes, about the balance between automation and human judgment. These questions do not stay within military circles. They influence budgets, research programs, industrial planning, and political debates. They affect how governments justify spending, how companies invest in technology, how societies think about security and risk. A single event, even a limited one, can ripple outward into decisions that shape years of development. For the people who live near the bridge, near the ports, near the routes that feed into them, the experience is more concrete and more personal. It shows up as longer travel times, shortages of certain goods, increased inspections, more visible security, more frequent disruptions. Life becomes slightly less predictable, slightly more constrained. These changes are often small in isolation, but cumulative in effect. They remind people that large geopolitical processes eventually express themselves in everyday routines. Over time, the memory of the initial event fades. Images are archived, headlines replaced, attention moves elsewhere. But the structural changes it triggered remain. New procedures become normal. New routes become standard. New assumptions replace old ones. The system does not return to what it was. It evolves into something different, shaped by what it has experienced. This is the deeper significance of moments like this. Not that they are dramatic, but that they are formative. They are points at which trajectories bend, sometimes subtly, sometimes sharply. They are moments when the future becomes slightly different from what it would have been otherwise. In that sense, the most important outcome is not the destruction of material or the temporary disruption of logistics. It is the change in how actors think about vulnerability, resilience, and control. It is the recognition that stability is not a given, but a condition that must be actively maintained, and that maintenance itself is a form of conflict. As this understanding spreads, strategies adjust, investments shift, doctrines evolve. What was once considered peripheral becomes central. What was once considered unlikely becomes planned for. And what was once considered safe becomes merely less risky than the alternatives. This is how the story continues long after the smoke clears, not as a single event frozen in time, but as a process that reshapes systems, perceptions, and choices. It is a reminder that in the modern world, power is not only about what can be built or destroyed, but about how quickly and effectively organizations can learn, adapt, and change. And in that ongoing process, every quiet night, every routine convoy, every stable screen is not just a moment of calm, but a potential starting point for the next shift in an ever-evolving landscape.